Hi, this is Gordon Hisayasu, and I'm doing Chapter 5, Part 2 of Life. One of the things that I really got fascinated when I was young was genetics. And when I was in college, I was trying to make these Drosophilus fruit flies and trying to produce and prove basically Mendel's laws of inheritance, and it's why I look a lot like my brothers, and I noticed that I did, to my horror, and I'm a little cuter version of them, I believe. But anyways, strangely enough, later on in my life, I had to teach molecular diagnostics to a bunch of medical technology students, and before I did that, I decided I needed to refresh my knowledge that I thought I had on genetics. So I took a continuing education course. And it was very astounding to me because now I'm looking at a new language and new techniques that I never believed were possible. So it was very interesting. But genetics was the thing that really helped me understand the mystery of God and the mystery of how God works, and it enhanced my belief in God. The idea of genetics, I'm going to jump up to 2003 with the Human Genome Project, it was called, where they basically sequenced all the genes in the nucleuses of our body, the chromosomes. And this was in 2003. But what they did there was they mapped 3 billion plus base pairs, they're called. And base pairs were used as the coding. A computer uses bits of information, or zeros and ones. You've maybe seen that as their language. The language of encoded information in the human body is through DNA, but it's the sequencing of what they call nucleotides. And these nucleotides are the amino acids, and they're uh, adenine and thymine and guanine, and matched with cytosine. And they're basically about 200,000 genes. And out of this whole human genome, the 3 billion, base pairs, the genes really only make up about 5% or maybe less of the whole human genome. And it's kind of interesting because the scientists called the other parts junk. And, you know, my studies in science really shows me that God doesn't make junk. And it's strangely, they're very slowly starting to understand special functions that this so-called junk has. They're starting to call them hidden treasures. I did this video, or tried this part 2 once before, and it got into my same problem I had like with water. I started to get a little too elaborate and too detailed scientifically. It got a little boring, to be honest with you. So I basically have tried to condense this, and this is kind of an abbreviated assessment of genetics. The 3 billion base pairs are part of that double-stranded helix that DNA is called, and it's basically has to be split up. The 3 billion plus base pairs have to be split up into 23 chromosomes, and the 23 chromosomes have to be coiled up. And this is a hard thing to imagine, but they're coiled up so that they can fit into your nucleus of just about every human cell you have. And believe it or not, you have 37.2 trillion human cells. So again, we're talking about small beyond small. We can't even imagine it that much. But inside each nucleus is these 23 chromosome pairs, and they make up what all the functions of the body. They create, they organize, and they help us with all of our life functions. And it's kind of interesting because, like I said before, there is only one DNA model for life. And you kind of can understand it when you see this kind of complexity and this kind of organization that it takes to create what life does and what life is. And it really, in terms of humans, and I'm going to just jump ahead to humans, God really worked overtime with the human genome. The idea, again, with me is that the questions sometimes lead more to my conclusions of my belief in God. You know, God made every one of the sea creatures and land creatures, and he said to produce offspring of the same kind. You know, and this brings us into reproduction. And for humans, it's a meiosis and a mitosis process. The meiosis, where we have the haploids, the male sperm and the female egg, that get together and create this diploid, and the diploids multiply over and over again within the woman's womb. So it's quite a process. You know, reproduction by God is displayed in many, many different ways. And, you know, we have budding cells, and we have all kinds of forms of reproduction or reproducing. But in the humans, we have that slow process where the diploids start to multiply, and this is happening in all the animals and all the plants. But for us, it really is a great discovery of how this genetic code works. You know, how these chromosome pairs, you know, divide up over and over, and that coding is basically like for genes coding proteins, so it makes our eyes and our brain and, you know, everything else. But the coding also does something else. It organizes us so that it makes us human. It makes us so that we can walk upright. It makes us so that we have that little opposing thumb. And when we have a bigger, more comprehensive brain than other animals. This is all in that DNA coding. And, you know, even though we're supposedly 99% the same as chimpanzees, that special coding, maybe it's in the junk, that makes us human. And it's quite a wonder of God. It's, of course, some of the things that really help me understand how God can control everything, how he does control everything with the genius of what DNA is. You might have heard some of these things about the DNA that is modified, called GMOs is one of the things. They have a new technique called CRISPR that helps modify genes, genetically modified organisms, GMOs, you know. And the idea of the specificness of that code, you know, there's a thing called SNPs, which is single nucleotide polymorphisms. And if you were to switch one of those little ATs or, you know, DC nucleotide sequences that occur out of 3 billion genes, you can cause a disease, you know, just one. And we know that cystic fibrosis and we know that sickle cell anemia are caused by a single nucleotide polymorphism. So it's really very interesting, the elaborate way that God has used DNA to really control all these functions we have, you know. And if you really want to try to understand things a lot more deeply, just get into this idea of stem cells and how stem cells differentiate. You know, it says all of a sudden, okay, now start making a spinal cord or start making a brain or a heart, or, you know, it's amazing. And it turns out, you know, I get back into this Yento song. It's called Piece of Pie, and I guess I'm really into Yento a lot. But in Piece of Pie, this is the words that Barbra Streisand sings, and I don't want it to sound like a song, but it's pretty hard to say without it kind of sounding like a song. In Piece of Pie, she says, "The more I live, the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I realize, the less I know." And this is really what the mystery of DNA has done for me. This is the excitement and the fascination I have with DNA, because we just are beginning to learn about what DNA does, and we don't understand hardly any of it. And we're going to discover more. You know, we will be able to pick up pieces of what stem cells are, and we'll be able to pick up pieces. We're not going to be able to know about this animation, inanimate to animate, you know, yet. Maybe someday we will, but it really shows me how the mystery of God works. And even though I've abbreviated this section, there will be another section on life. Thank you.